war, and now it is women working for war. No longer peace and prettiness for women. Women in overalls, women in uniforms, working, marching, women in the ranks, women in the factories, women taking part in the 20th century's biggest parade. Women with heads held high, women who work for war.
Well, I worked at the Auckland Star at that time, and we used to live in St Kevin's Arcade. My brother, Vic, had gone off to Greece and Crete, and I'd like to say it was totally patriotic, but he was involved in my memories, of course. But I thought the thought of all those lovely sailors was rather tempting, so I thought I'd opt for the Navy, because I was much younger then, you see, and you think differently. You had to be 18 before you joined anyway. Prior to joining the Navy, I'd gone to a night class to learn the Morse code and all that stuff, you know. Thought I was jumping the gun and would be accepted because of that. And I'd never used it at all, of course. It was all teleprinters and things like that that we were using.
My father was a doctor. He was bitter about the war because both his parents were drowned in the Lusitania. And he was very close to his mother. My father was so angry with the Germans that he enlisted and went to France, but I never heard much about that. It was always concentrated on the grandparents. You had to be 18, and I signed up very shortly afterwards. I had applied to go into the Navy, but there were no Wrens in Auckland. There were Wrens in Wellington and Wrens at that secret place in Blenheim that was, we were so pleased to find out about later. I saw a clipping in the paper saying that Miss Herrick was coming up to interview the first intake for Auckland. And I thought, blimey, and I haven't even been told about this. So I went anyway. And when I got to the desk, Miss Herrick said, well, you're not on the list for an interview. And I said, no, but I should have been. And she said, oh yes, but the people we're interviewing are going to be cooks and stewards, and you weren't down for that. And I said, well, if you just let me in, I'll sort it out when I get in. But anyway, I went in with the cooks and stewards, but I never did cook or stew.
So then my father was very, very strict. My father didn't believe in women going to work. He believed you should stay at home. And we weren't allowed to do anything without his say. And so I said to him, I don't care what you say, Dad, but I'm going to join the Air Force. And he said, right, you can do that, I'm proud of you. I was 20. Almost 21, yes. So I could have gone without his permission if I'd waited a few more weeks. So I did join the Air Force and I went to Wellington. I was very young and innocent. Yeah, I remember sitting in the train and they kept all the women set in different seats. And they put a man beside us all. And this man his hands kept wandering all the time, and I was very young and inexperienced. I didn't know how to deal with that. And I couldn't dare go to sleep. But I survived it, all right.
I joined the Red Cross. And with no idea, of course, of going overseas. No girls had gone overseas. And so it was much later in the year that word came out they were sending 200 girls to the Middle East to work in the hospitals. I applied, and my best friend who was doing the course with me, we both applied. A message came through my tutor who was there to report to Auckland Hospital right then and there. My father was on the front lawn painting a little dinghy we had, yellow. And my mother was inside, and of course they were absolutely horrified. But you don't give them a thought, really. I was so excited. I was nearly beside myself. My mother said, "Don't be so excited," she said. "They'll never take you. You're too skinny." Anyway, I did pass everything.
So I was 14 when the war broke out, and I joined the land service at 17, the end of 1941. Well, I wanted to be a nurse. When it came to Mum and Dad signing to let me join the nursing service, the matron had told them she was losing nurses through pregnancy to the Air Force blokes up at the airport and Waipara, so she wouldn't let me go. So I went down to the Waikato and I joined the land service in the Tuakau office. I had fallen out with my parents and forged my father's signature because it was and wrote and told them what I decided to do. I think it was 4 shillings a day to start with, and 7 shillings a day was the most we ever achieved. Miss Herrick was given permission very reluctantly, I think, because the government was very conscious of the fact that the New Zealand Navy was not an identity in itself. It was the New Zealand wing of the British Navy. And anything that looked as if England was putting the harbour, they were very against it. But Miss Herrick was given permission to enlist 900 Wrens, but she never got to that number because she was a bit choosy, says she modestly. Almost all the officials, Miss Herrick, who was Chief Wren, and Miss Fennick, they'd all come out of the Girl Guides. Eight of us, I think, were sent to ACH, which was the Teachers Training College in Epsom. That was the combined headquarters, Auckland combined headquarters, ACH. And the SDO, the Signal Distributing Office, was the first Wren job in Auckland. We had a bank of telephones, the old-fashioned, wind the handle, and each was connected to an observation point. Might be a lighthouse on the coast, somewhere where they could see shipping approaching New Zealand. And it was their job to send the information to us, and our job to sort out who should get it, whether it should go to someone who was likely to send ships out if necessary or whatever. And we worked from 8 till 4 one day, from 4 till 11 the next day, and from 11 till 8 a.m. the following day. Then we had the next day off.
I used to say I would go to bed for 6 months once the war was over, because I was always tired, yeah. But it was good, I enjoyed it. I shouldn't say you enjoy it, but I did enjoy it, yeah. Except for going on night watches very late at night either 8 on and 8 off, or 4 on and 4 off. And you had to walk all the way along that waterfront, you know, from the Rennery, as we called it. The building is still there. When you'd finished and you were absolutely whacked, you had to walk all the way back, get something to eat, and perhaps kept for about a couple of hours, then you'd be walking back on duty again on the short watches. We did a lot of marching and all that sort of stuff, you know, so that when a very important person came, we knew how to do the drill and so on.
Wheeling in comes this Liberator bomber, bringing Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt on her first visit to New Zealand. Mrs. Roosevelt is here to visit American forces, the American Red Cross, whose uniform she wears, and she will see something of the war work of our women.
Mrs. Roosevelt was the one important one who came, and they lined us up very, very early in the morning. We'd been on watch all night, so what we thought of Mrs. Roosevelt coming couldn't be printed, really. Well, we were in the signal distributing office. Keeping watch is rather a romantic term for that, but they called it going on watch. Sometimes I used to relieve the telephone operator, that's quite good at that, over in the main building at the naval base. If they couldn't get anybody else, I'd be put on that duty. So I used to spend all night talking to the Yanks on the boats and making blind dates, which we never kept. The ones we envied most who were on the Admiral's barge, as they called it, and they were the glamour girls who took all the officers from Philomel over to Auckland. And they were the only ones who were at sea. But I went to sea one day on an English destroyer, Wessex, and they used to take us for the experience to go out in the Gulf. And all the wrens were seasick, of course, except me, I wasn't seasick.
And we went to Trentham Racecourse, and that was our really first taste of being in the army. And it was all injections, pay books, and the oath, of course, to the king then. There were 2 or 3 ladies there with sewing machines to do our alterations. So we were a bit lucky, you know, having uniforms made to measure. And we got the awful khaki uniforms that were to be our working thing. And they were really ugly. On the 22nd of December, we got on the Maunganui hospital ship. We went to Cairo and to Helwan. It was a big hospital, a big building that had been a resort hotel apparently. Went on duty, you did all the temperatures, gave all the washers out. But there weren't a lot of wounded. They were more sick patients, you know, there were dysentery wards and ENT wards. And the invitations started pouring in from everywhere. And of course, to get to Helwan, you go past Māori camp. So there were plenty of New Zealanders there. But the first few months, I think it was work hard all day and go out every night. It was great.
Start with, I worked in the kitchen at the Waffrey, and then I went to the air headquarters, and I was a runner, and I'd go around taking dispatches to different people around. There was an officer, and he said, "You look a nice little waif. Well, would you like to do in a special course I'm doing? It's highly secret, and you look as though you can keep a secret." So that was the radar course I went on. And because I was good at maths, I came top of that. I think I got 10 out of 10 for the whole lot. And we came back to Auckland. It was at the Teachers Training College. The Army, Navy and Air Force took it over, and the Americans. So we were next to the operations room, and there was one of all those other services up on the gantry. And we'd pass the information we got, and we'd pass it on to the other Army, Navy and the Americans. But you had to check it every 10 minutes. You sat there with earphones on. You know, you'd wonder what's going to happen today. It was quite frightening at times, because sometimes the Americans wouldn't turn on their IFF, and we didn't know who they were. Could have been the Japanese. We got quite angry with the Americans sometimes. Well, they used to come into the station and say, could they see us? Eventually they let a couple of them in, and they couldn't believe where they'd gone, because they'd missed Auckland altogether. And if we hadn't found them, then they would have been lost to sea, because Auckland is a very small place to find. But they couldn't believe it, because sometimes they go way out to sea. I think some of them were only 18, and we thought that was very young when you're 21. And they weren't very experienced at all. And they bought us nylons and candy. When they'd come in, I'd take them home to my mother, and she'd give them a meal home. They were very grateful, and grateful that we'd saved their lives.
Between milkings, there are still the countless jobs to be done, and there are fewer men to do them. Sons and farmhands left the tractors for tanks and bombers, and the farmers who carried on have become no younger. To the farmers' assistance have come the land girls. Where the boys have gone into the forces, girls have come forward to do their jobs. When it comes to feeding calves, land girls are out on their own. Mothering young animals comes more naturally to girls than to boys, and under a girl's supervision, every calf gets good treatment.
We were paid a man's wage. We were the first women in New Zealand to ever be paid a man's wage, which didn't go down very well with the farmers, of course. Well, the farmers were paid to train girls who didn't know much about farming, but a lot of the girls were hairdressers. They came from the city. They didn't know one end of a cow from the other, and they must have really had to struggle with it. For instance, they didn't know how to pick up a calf or a sheep and hold it or anything like that. They couldn't work a dog, and they couldn't ride a horse. So it was very hard. They wouldn't have known how to harness horses or anything similar to that. But they learned. That was the point. We were all volunteers, actually. The manpower didn't start to conscript anyone until about the last year of the war. We had a dress uniform which was similar to the army, but it was brown, and we had a cream shirt, and our lanyards and badges were green. The shoes were quite good to dance in. I wore it to church on Sundays and shopping if I was going out with the farmer. And our working gear was all supplied. It was overalls and khaki shirts and boots, and we had a leather jacket and a raincoat and sou'wester hat and gumboots when they were available, but of course they were things of the past by the end of the war.
I got into trouble because I was over in the SDO, which was over on the other shore for a little while, and I was the leading hand of the watch. And an officer came in and demanded that my Wren would make his bed. And I thought that was totally improper. You know, all he had to do was throw a blanket on it. So I told her to refuse. Well, of course, next day I was up before the commander. And I didn't get home, so my mother was ringing up where was I, and the signal boatswain told him that I'd been clapped in irons, and but I hadn't. And I went to see the commanding officer, and shivering in all my timbers, you know. And he just said, if an officer tells you to stand on your head, then Kappa, you do it and then complain after. But I'm sure he was having a good laugh about the whole incident. Next time we went on watch, there was a notice up, wrens are not to make officers' beds. So I know who won in the end, yeah.
That's when the Germans were coming down, and they were pushing down towards Alexandria. So we were going back down to the canal zone. That was when we decided to put on a concert. We got some old mosquito nets that had holes and things, and we made frocks just to our knees and put pink paper flowers over the strap at the top, and we all practiced this little dance. And also we made grass skirts, which we put on over our bathing suits, and we sang the pagan love song and some other Hawaiian song. So that went down very well. Otherwise, we just sat on the beach every day. There was no work to do or anything. We just had to wait. That lasted for quite a while, and then when the Battle of Alamein, that reversed the flow and started pushing them back again. My friend's boyfriend, of course, was fighting with the New Zealanders, and he had been at Alamein and incidentally got the Military Cross. So about a month later, of course, she gets the day off to go to Cairo, and she gets a diamond, lovely diamond on her finger. And then they decided they would get married, and I was a bridesmaid. And we both went down to Cairo the day before the wedding. It was to be in the Presbyterian church in Cairo. And he was a New Zealand vicar that came to marry them. And we went to a florist shop and we bought 10, I can't remember whether they were dahlias or chrysanthemums, but there were 5 each, and they were that nice sort of tawny shade, browny orangey. We were in drill uniform at that stage, and these looked very nice with the uniforms. The best man was Les Pearce, that we all knew, and he happened to be at Māori at the time, and there were quite a few Auckland young men who were in camp at the time. And it was just a happy time, those 16 months, very happy time. And then they said we were going to Italy.
We used to get round the old piano at the Rennery and make awful noises, have great sing-songs, bashing out all the latest tunes. And then they decided they would have someone to come in to do a wren show, which was put on professionally. We had a very good producer. I was doing an item with an officer. You might remember that lovely song, Lover Come Back to Me, while I was singing to him in that scene. I was playing the ukulele in this particular one, and I wrote some music for the Wren show. We're the girls in navy blue and we're here to see it through. Very original, you must admit. And we wanted to travel the whole of New Zealand with it, but the Wren superintendent wouldn't let us. I think she thought we'd get up to high jinks if we did, you know.
From the north across these peaceful waters comes a shadow. Japan. At last, war really comes to New Zealand. Japan strikes without warning.
New Zealand was threatened. It really was threatened. We could pick up anything that was threatening to us and alert the whole of New Zealand. We had a few false alarms and they were alerted. And one of the photos in one of these books is a photo of me out at Piha, and we just went to have a look at these people we talked to all day long on the telephones. We wanted to see where they lived. They were specially trained to read the cathode ray tubes, and they'd read it on their map and send us the grid. I can remember one time being on duty and there was what we thought was a submarine coming up around the Coromandel Peninsula, and then it turned out it was a fishing ship. But the shipping boats weren't allowed to take off without telling us. You weren't allowed to even go out in a rowboat too far without reporting that you were going to go, because we'd pick them up. New Zealand was very, very tense at that time. We thought we were going to be attacked. We really did.
If any Zero fighters ever reach the shores of New Zealand, it's going to be 0 hour for them when these men get to work. Even high flying won't save them.
They'd picked up an aircraft carrier, as they thought, off Cape Reinga. Unit 6 and Unit 7 had picked it up. Well, Unit 6 is at Spirits Bay, and Unit 7 was at somewhere just off Whangarei Harbour there. And everybody was panicking and all the services turned out, and one of the men grabbed me by the shoulder and said, "Come on, girl, what do they say now? What do they say now?" And I said, "Well, excuse me, sir, but I think the Three Kings Islands are up there, but it hasn't been drawn on the map." So that's what it was. We weren't allowed to talk about it for 50 years. We had the oath of secrecy. It was 50 years. I just said, "I'm working at Air Headquarters." Even my mother and father didn't know what I was doing. And from shift to shift, you weren't allowed to talk what's happened, or New Zealand wasn't really ready for them if they had come. And they promised us that if they did come, they'd shoot us all because we knew too much. But then they thought at one stage they'd send all the men to the South Island and keep all the women up in the North Island so the Japanese would have their women. But that never happened. No. Luckily. We would have had Japanese fathers.
It was the first time I'd seen the Waikato River, of course. I'd seen the big tidal rivers up north, but nothing like the old Waikato. And that was a dairy and sheep farm, but it was all horse work as far as the sheep were concerned. But I'd ridden since I can't remember. So we always had our own horses at home, and went from there down to Whakatane, because I'd never seen snow or ice. It was a rude awakening as far as the climate went, and I was working for a share milker, which was the lowest form of the farming hierarchy in those days. But I got on quite well with the people. I had never been with a family who ill-treated me at any time. because I was standing up for myself and I wouldn't have put up with it. I worked there for a year, and then when the end of that season came, the manpower in Whangarei had been asked for someone further afield, down country, and he wanted a strong woman who could harness and drive a 4-horse team in a wagon. So they asked me if I'd take it on, and I said yes. Well, I got down there, I weighed 7.5 stone, and he took one look at me and said I couldn't do it. So I had to prove to him that I could. I was there for about 6 months, I suppose. And then as the servicemen came back from overseas, if they wanted our job, we were to leave, you see, and make vacancies for them. So I had to go back up north again, and I worked at a farm at Mata, just south of Whangarei. I could manage the work that was needed to be done. We did draining work and, you know, things that women had never really attempted before, but that was part of the job. Join the Women's Land Service. The enlistment posters read, "It's not for active service. You shouldn't wind up dead. The uniform's attractive, the working gear is good, so join our working band. Or the manpower will conscript you and make you work in town. They'll put you in a factory and that will get you down." And so we joined the service, and land girls we became. We knew there'd be no glory and very little fame. We worked hard in all weather and took the good and bad. I can't list all the varied work on farms that our girls manned, but we're proud we did our service, doing all work on the land.
And we arrived in Italy. Oh, now that was cold. I've never been so cold. And then we all got in a hospital train, which was going right across Italy to Caserta, which was not far from Naples and a bit too close to Cassino. And we were getting the wounded, definitely, once Cassino started, which was pretty soon after we got there, I think. Well, it must have been, because we weren't that far south of Cassino. Anyway, that was really hard work. The wounded just came in all the time. They were fighting first for the railway station. And of course, the Maori battalion, we got a lot of young Maori boys. They were very good patients, the Maoris. They were full of fun, even if they were really sick and wounded, you know. They were still good fun and always a smile, and they'd tease us about our wiggles as we walked up the ward and little things like that. But they enjoyed it, enjoyed being able to do it, you know, without somebody snapping their heads off. And they just came in all the time. And they came in, and of course you had to clean them up and wash them and get them in bed. But it was quite sad. It used to upset me sometimes. We had one person in the ward there, but he was in bed all the time. He might have had a head wound, but he'd definitely been shell-shocked or whatever the term is. But all he said all day was, "Hi-ho, Silver," just all the time, just saying it. And you know, I couldn't help thinking all the time, that poor boy's mother, when he gets home, he was waiting, he would have been going home. It was really quite frightening, you know. I know the orderly said, "Oh, young girls like you," he said, "you're too young for this." Of course, I wasn't by then. I was probably 24 then. Still, they came in and came in. And my father was very ill at home, and he was getting worse. And once you'd been there 3 years, they said you could come home.
But I went to sea one day on an English destroyer, Wessex, and they used to take us for the experience to go out in the Gulf, and that was where I met my husband. They'd invited us to go, a group of Wrens, to go on board and be shown around the boat. Well, that was what they said. And I'll leave it to your imagination. Once you get down in the officers' wardroom, it's more drinks and everything else, you know. And so, anyway, when the yeoman of signals rang up next time with the signals, I told him what I thought of the English officers on board Wessex and told him off. So, and then he came over to see me, and 6 weeks later we were married. He was from Nottinghamshire, and he had to get permission, of course, from his commanding officer, and they went and inquired all into my character and so on from the superintendent of Wrens, and whether I was a suitable person to marry the yeoman of signals off Wessex. And I must have got the thumbs up. I was a bit notorious with it being 6 weeks, you know, and I had no wedding dress. I was just going to get married in uniform. And then one of the other Wrens on my watch offered her beautiful lace wedding dress. So I was suitably attired, which would pleased his best man, who was Sub-Lieutenant Gherkin. And of course I made a bit of a joke of that name, of course, as we unrespecting New Zealanders do. But anyway, it all turned out all right.
The men overseas were given a certain number of letter cards before Christmas to write home to their families, and my husband Bill had some he didn't know he didn't need to use, so he offered them to another soldier, and he said, "You take them, I haven't got a Sheila to write to." So this other soldier who had known me all my life and lived in the valley in Kohumaro too, he said, "I'll give you a Sheila to write to." So he gave Bill my name and address. So I wrote to Bill for about 4 years. He was in the B Company of the 21st Battalion, and he was in Egypt until transferred from Egypt to Italy. He said if they had the Australians on one side of them and the Maori Battalion on the other, they were pretty invincible. So I met him at the station when we'd had photographs of each other, of course. There were so many other men coming off that train that it was, I knew he was tall, but he was a bit over 6 feet, so I found him quite easily, really. We went to see the family of the man who had given him the letter card, because he was killed in Italy towards the last couple of weeks of the war. And his parents wanted to meet Bill. It was nice for his parents, I think, but it was heartbreaking as well. And we got engaged on the Easter of 1946, and we were married on the 5th of July 1946, and that's 70 years ago this year. Yes, we went to the registry office and I had a nice little corsage of flowers to wear on my suit, and afterwards we went and had lunch, and then we went to the pictures. And then we went across on the ferry to the Mondesire Hotel on North Shore,
And because the Americans were so many in Auckland at the time, we'd booked a room, of course. Bill had done that ahead, but it had 2 single beds in it.
Now, all this time, of course, my husband had been a POW. He'd been captured in Greece. So he really didn't see very much of the war at all. It was just a matter of months. He was captured on the 29th of April and he was liberated on the 29th of April in 45. Then he got home in August and we were married in September. I thought he was pretty lucky actually that I waited I hadn't seen him for just under 5 years.
We met and he was a very good dancer and I liked to dance too. And at the Crystal Palace Ballroom in those days, if you had the last dance with somebody, then they were allowed to take you home. So he always used to make sure he had the last dance with me and take me home. Oh, this is my wedding photo. We were married on the 17th of February, 1945.
Well, there was one of the group that I went in with. She had been very keen on the captain of a British warship that had been in Auckland having a refit. He sailed, and there she was, weeping on the side of on the dock. He got out as far as the Great Barrier and the ship developed some defect. So he signalled her defect become apparent, returning to port, see you there or something, you sort of see. She came in at this party, so I think I've said that the hostesses used to send a general invitation to anything that looked like a man. She walked into the room towing David behind her, and she said, whatever the boy's name was, he's coming back to Auckland and he expects me to be on the wharf. So stick him on ice, I'll be back for him later. David was a lieutenant, brackets E, meaning engineer, you know, gets all greasy. So we went out to Glen Innes and danced and came back fairly interested, didn't we? Anyway, at our silver wedding party, she came down from Canada, where she now lives, and made a little speech. And she said, I said to Barb, put him on ice, I'll be back for him later. And she said, I didn't mean marry him.
I belong to the Reds Association and I go to the meetings. My very close friend who was my relieving watch, they could hear us coming down the passage from the dockyard and she'd say, there's that Doris Capper again, singing at the top of her voice. So, and she was lovely and we lost her. That's the trouble at my age, you start losing all your best friends, you know.
I just thoroughly loved being in the Wrens, and we've had a great camaraderie since. Of course, they spread all over the world, so it's quite difficult to get more than about 30 of them together at any one time, and a lot of them have died. It's and those who haven't died have got funny ailments, so you wonder where it's leading. But it was a very special time for us.
You can hardly believe that that is me, but that's me when I was in love. And I can't tell you who I was in love with because I used to fall in love all the time.